trial, a court rules out an inquiry into jury tampering. But his lawyers say they'll continue to investigate allegations of intimidation. The rival bid for Rover, BMW, is urged to extend the deadline for offers. Teachers decide to ballot on strike action over pay linked to results.
Also tonight, Scotland's First Minister Donald Dewar is admitted to hospital in Glasgow for tests on a heart condition. And the legal moves to have the long-awaited trial of the Lockerbie bombing suspects in the Netherlands postponed.
Good evening. A full investigation into allegations of jury tampering in the Tony Martin murder trial has been ruled out by officials from Norwich Crown Court. But Mr. Martin's lawyers have said they'll continue to look into suggestions that jurors were intimidated. Concerns were raised after a woman who claimed to be a jury member called a radio phone-in and said she was frightened to leave her house. Tony Martin was jailed for life last week for the murder of a teenage burglar who broke into his isolated farmhouse.
As court officials met to discuss his case, Martin was at this Oxfordshire prison. There was talk of him being in a segregation unit for his own safety. But friends who've met the 55-year-old eccentric say he's bearing up and has the support of other inmates.
All the prison officers in there are giving him 100% support. There were prisoners and wives of prisoners and friends coming up to him and saying, "You're a marvellous man and we hope you'll get out."
Away from the public gaze, court officials met to consider whether there'd been jury intimidation. No jurors complained to the police, and those in charge here decided to take no action. It's up to Martin's lawyers to pursue the matter.
It is therefore a matter for Mr. Martin's legal advisers to decide whether the allegations made by a person who claimed to be a juror can support an appeal, and if so, to lodge an application to the Court of Appeal.
The Morning Crew on The Breakfast Show, Broadland 102.4.
Talk of jury threats first emerged when a woman claiming to be on the Martin jury rang this independent radio breakfast show and chatted to the presenter.
The person said that the last 8 days had changed their lives and that they were frightened to leave their house that particular morning. But at no time did she suggest that was because she feared reprisals or had been intimidated at all.
Threats have hung over this case. Martin was brought to court each day by police from a safe house after someone offered £60,000 for him to be killed. And during the trial here, Martin's legal team had 2 meetings with the police. If their client had been acquitted, they'd have been offered police protection because of fears for their safety. There have even been questions about this man, Eli Frankham, a traveller and former bare-knuckle boxing champion, who with his friends was in court twice. It's been suggested he stared at the jury from the public gallery.
No, not at all. I might have glimpsed at them as I was looking to see the reaction of them, but not intimidating, no.
After days of speculation about pressure on the jury, little hard evidence has emerged. Martin's lawyers, who aren't surprised by the court's decision not to act, are continuing to examine whether or not the jury were influenced.
We'll be lodging the appeal on Friday of this week, and the jury matters will form part of that appeal.
While Martin languishes in jail, his friends are raising funds to hire security guards to protect what little there is to protect at Bleak House, his isolated, near-derelict Norfolk farmhouse.
Peter, at the end of all this, are we any nearer to knowing whether there was jury intimidation or not?
For several days now, there's been much talk around that issue, but there's been little hard fact, and courts like the court behind me, Norwich Crown Court, deal in facts. The only fact we have is that a juror rang this radio station, but the radio station says that she didn't talk about tampering. The same woman is said to have rung one of Martin's solicitors. He won't reveal what they discussed, but the publicist Max Clifford, who's representing Martin, has spoken of it being a major breakthrough. We'll just have to wait and see. But in the coming days and weeks, the pressure will be on Martin's legal team to put up or shut up, to prove these allegations or to accept the jury's verdict that they found Martin guilty of murder and that on the night in question, he acted as judge, jury and executioner.
Peter, thanks a lot. As the deadline approaches for the sale of Rover, the Trade and Industry Secretary Stephen Byers has urged BMW to give a rival bid more time. BMW will consider an offer by the financier's Alchemy partners later this week, but the Phoenix Consortium, which also wants Rover, says it can save more jobs than Alchemy, but it needs time to get the bid ready.
The BMW board meets at the end of the week to make the crucial decision. Do they accept the current offer on the table from Alchemy partners to take Rover off BMW's hands? It's a giveaway because BMW will give £500 million to whoever takes the burden from it. Or do they wait for this man to get the finance on his late bid sorted out? John Towers used to run Rover, now he runs Phoenix. He's been talking to banks today, he'll be talking to banks tomorrow. But what he really needs is more time. Local union people know what they want.
We want John Towers to be given a fair crack of the whip and to be given a chance to put this business plan together and be allowed just as much time as Alchemy have had to put theirs together.
So what's the difference between the bids? Phoenix would make 220,000 cars a year, half the current total. Across Rover, up to 3,000 jobs would go, but the plan isn't certain. Under Alchemy, it's alleged that 80,000 cars would be made, with perhaps 10,000 jobs going throughout Rover, though Alchemy says it wouldn't be that much. Their funds are sorted out. And Alchemy thinks it's now in the bag.
I think it is, nothing's done till it is done, but it is very nearly a done deal, and we expect it to be so on Friday.
Of course the Phoenix bid is not dead in the water. The fact is that we're hundreds of problems to start out with, all of one of which we have solved. There remains one problem, which is a bureaucratic problem.
But not quite. It's a matter of seeing Rover's books to assure the banks that the sums add up, and that will take weeks. And for every day's delay, BMW loses £2 million. BMW wants shot of Rover as soon as possible. But some hope for the late bid came from the government this afternoon. The industry secretary's spoken to both bidders, plus BMW, and there'll be a meeting between BMW and the new Phoenix people tomorrow. The overwhelming likelihood is that BMW will do the deal by the end of the week to offload Rover to Alchemy Partners. Alchemy Partners offers a much more modest future than Phoenix. Whether more realistic, it's impossible to say. Neither bid, though, offers anything like a rosy future to what was once one of Britain's premium brands. Stephen Evans, BBC News.
Well, let's go over to our correspondent George Eakin, who's at Rover's Longbridge plant. George, what are the chances that BMW will take this Phoenix bid seriously, do you think?
Well, there were reports earlier on this evening which alarmed some people that BMW had ruled out negotiating with Phoenix. That isn't the case. There seems to have been a mix-up in translation. BMW is, of course, negotiating with Alchemy, and it has an exclusivity clause which applies to that, but it hasn't ruled out negotiating with Phoenix. But Phoenix doesn't have its bid in place because it doesn't have the banks backing it. And to get the banks backing it, it needs to do this investigation into the Rover books. And that's why it's such a premium being placed on getting an extension to Friday's deadline. Now, the unions and the workers here, where there's been an extended Easter shutdown, as you can probably see behind me, are very angry and defiant, and they're promising they're not going to go down without a fight. In short, they say that BMW did the dirty on Rover a few weeks ago, and it's now continuing, as they put it, to stab the workers in the back by not allowing Phoenix extra time so that it can get its bid together.
Well, they say they're not going to go down without a fight, but what can they do to stop this going ahead?
Well, tomorrow they're organising a huge rally in the park opposite the Longbridge plant. They're expecting many thousands of people to turn up for that, to show their public support for the Phoenix bid. It must be pointed out that 80,000 people marched through Birmingham a couple of weeks ago with no real effect on BMW. But they're also going to go to Munich. They're sending a delegation of union officials and workers to Munich. BMW has said that that visit on Thursday is going to be a waste of time. And of course, all of this is taking place against the very gloomy report which is happening from the government task force, reporting that maybe 19,000 jobs in this community could go.
OK, George, thanks very much. Britain's biggest teaching union, the NUT, is to ballot teachers over whether to call a one-day strike over pay linked to results. The decision was announced at the end of the union's annual conference in Harrogate. The result is a defeat for the union's leaders, who oppose strike action.
Teachers are angry about the plan to give extra pay to staff who are doing a good job. Those selected for performance pay will get an immediate £2,000 rise. Head teachers will start assessing their staff throughout England and Wales next week. But in Scotland, the unions have successfully resisted such moves. Teachers don't like the fact that one measure of their success will be how much they improve their pupils' results. Some say that'll put even more stress on children taking tests. Even the head teacher at this Surrey school has her doubts.
In my staff, the whole school works well as a team. and I'm very concerned indeed that this might stop the notion of teamwork.
The NUT is united in its opposition to performance pay, but divided over the wisdom of strikes.
If we don't strike on this, the very issue the union was founded on, then what do we strike on? We have to take that to our members.
This government's education plans have been thought out long before they came to power. One day's national strike is not going to make them change their minds one little bit.
But the conference did vote for a strike ballot next term. The union's leader, though, left some hope for parents worried about school closures that the strike might yet not happen.
My own view is that it's unlikely, because I cannot believe that the members of the National Union of Teachers will think that the government will back down simply because the NUT alone, of the teacher organisations, calls for a one-day national strike.
Whether or not there are strikes, one thing is clear. The NUT leaves here committed to other forms of industrial action as well. And that means there could be a work to rule, which would involve teachers refusing to take part in after-school activities, such as running sports events or parents' evenings. Mike Baker, BBC News, Harrogate.
A British tourist has been killed after a performing elephant went on the rampage in Thailand. Andrea Taylor, who is 23 and from Wigan, died in hospital after being attacked by the elephant at a private animal park near Pattaya, south of the capital, Bangkok. Her sister and father were both seriously injured in the attack. The government says it's to unveil moves to prevent older people being thrown on the employment scrap heap. Ministers want a change of culture so that workers over 50 are not squeezed out of the job market by younger employees. Early retirement also cost the government billions of pounds. A report out later this week will suggest changes to the rules.
Excuse me, madam.
Yes.
Good afternoon.
On Thursday, the government will publish a list of proposals to give the over 50s a bigger involvement in the workplace. It's expected to recommend that the minimum age at which people can draw upon private and company pensions should be raised from 50 to 55. These proposals would not take effect until 2010 at the earliest, but they've been broadly welcomed by groups representing older workers.
What it might do, of course, is encourage employers to hang off for 5 years if that's a sort of general policy of their own to get rid of everybody at 50. And that can only be a good thing.
Norman Sanderson retired at the age of 53 from his job with the high street chain Littlewoods. He now lives on his company pension. But if the new proposals had been in force, he wouldn't have been able to do that.
I've taken up a distance learning course in astronomy and started playing bridge, which I've not played for many years. In fact, I'm doing so many things now that I have to prioritise my time. So really, it's worked out very well for me, thank you.
Pension providers are worried that the proposed changes will discourage people from saving for their retirement.
I think it's going to make the pension system more complicated and an even bigger turn-off than it is at the moment. We should be encouraging people to join pension schemes.
On Thursday, the Secretary of State here at the Department of Social Security, Alistair Darling, will be named the Cabinet Champion of the over 50s. The government sees this as part of a programme to utilise better the talents of this age group. But its critics fear that some of the ideas being put forward may unfairly restrict the choices that working people can make. Greg Wood, BBC News, at the Department of Social Security.
And there'll be more on what kind of impact the changes would have on business later on BBC News 24. Police are hunting a lone gunman who shot and wounded 7 children at America's National Zoo in Washington. One 11-year-old boy is still critically ill after suffering head injuries. Thousands of holidaymakers celebrating an African-American Family Day at the zoo found themselves at the centre of gunfire after fighting broke out.
Washington's normally visitor-packed zoo is closed today as a mark of respect to the victims and to allow the investigation to continue. Police believe they know who the gunman is, a teenage African-American, but they haven't yet made an arrest.
There's a strong suspicion that there may have been some gang activity involved. The children appear to have known one another. As to the suspect, the police are working very, very hard on this and expect to have someone in custody as soon as possible.
The shooting happened at the end of what was supposed to be a fun day at the zoo, celebrating African-American families. But a dispute between 2 rival groups of teenagers escalated. Then, gunfire and confusion.
Coming out the handouts, I heard gunshots. And all I seen was a lot of people running down and screaming. It was a whole lot of them.
Just what the dispute was about is unknown, but whatever the cause, the shooting has shocked the nation's capital. Washington's residents had been hoping their city was losing its reputation as one of the most dangerous places to live in America.
And we apologise for that report. The time now, though, it's 6:15. In a few moments, new laws to help the children trapped in the adoption system find parents. And how did we cope on the first big day of the big number change?
And in 15 minutes, all Scotland's top story, sport, a full weather forecast. And could one of the last bastions of the cigarette be about to call time on the weed? And children's charities line up to back the controversial campaign to scrap Section 28.
Ways of making it easier for couples to adopt children have been discussed by children's charities and social services managers in Downing Street today. There are plans for a new national register to match adults with children, but adoption agencies say there needs to be more funding if the changes are to work.
Let's do the rabbits then. A single mother, Sue Phillips, has adopted for nearly 18 years. When she took on Adrian, he was a baby. The fact that he came from a mixed-race background was not an issue. Since then, the process to adopt her other two daughters, Shamim and Beth, has been lengthy and at times wearing. Were she to apply again, she says she'd probably be turned down because the criteria are now so strict. So she's not surprised there are more children needing homes than parents ready to take them on.
I think taking away all the red tape would help, and not worrying about whether the people are in two-parent families, how old they are, where they live, but looking at what people have to offer to any prospective child.
Those involved in adoption met in Downing Street to discuss government proposals to speed the system up. They include uniform standards to eliminate arbitrary bans on those wanting to adopt and a national register of adopters to make the matching process more simple. Agencies approve, but want more financial support for those taking on brothers and sisters who are hardest to place.
I hope the Prime Minister may be announcing fairly shortly a system of new adoption allowances to encourage families, because it would take away some of the extra expense of taking large groups of brothers and sisters into your home.
Yeah, Beth, it's pleased to be here.
Like two of Sue's youngsters, many children are in care before being placed with a new family. Though agencies regret the time it takes to carry out police checks, they say growing concern about child abuse means vetting takes time.
We have to be sure that we're not placing the children a greater risk in a family where they potentially could be abused. Is that, again, it's as brutal as that, I'm afraid.
By giving such prominence to the adoption issue, the government hopes to have bolstered its commitment to the family, but it's also reopened the debate about exactly who should and should not be allowed to adopt. Karen Allen, BBC News, Downing Street.
It's emerged in the last few minutes that Manchester United's record signing of Ruud van Nistelrooy is in doubt. The Dutch striker has yet to pass the medical that would confirm Britain's biggest transfer.
As you will be aware, Ruud van Nistelrooy has had a knee injury, has not played for the last 6 to 8 weeks. A key focus of our test today has been on the injured knee, and we have been unable to complete all the necessary tests to our satisfaction today.
Well, let's go over to Paul Newman now, who's at Old Trafford. Paul, what does all this mean? Has he actually failed the medical?
Well, what they're saying is that the medical tests will continue. Quite extraordinary saga here this afternoon. Van Nistelrooy was at a private clinic in Cheadle, just about 8 miles or so from here, undergoing this medical. Everybody thought it was a formality. He was supposed to be presented to the media at about 4 o'clock this afternoon. Time slipped by and we got excuse after excuse, and finally David Gill, the finance director, if you've just heard, made that statement and refused to take any questions about the future prospects for this transfer. But it must place serious doubts now over this so-called record transfer.
Well, it's very embarrassing for Manchester United. Have they said any more? Are they likely to?
I don't think they are. I mean, what they're saying is that they will continue these tests in the next few days. And what's, I think, particularly embarrassing is that we had this row over the weekend anyway about how news of this proposed transfer leaked out. You'll recall on Friday, PSV Eindhoven, Van Nistelrooy's club, called a press conference. He was there, he was present. He talked about the joy of coming to Old Trafford. He was here yesterday to see the celebrations for winning the Premiership. And yet when it comes to the crunch, that medical still hadn't been passed. And it seems extraordinary that a club of this nature, a club of this stature, can go ahead and make an announcement, albeit through a leak, without going through those procedures.
All right, Paul, we'll keep us informed. Thanks very much for joining us from Old Trafford. 2 more supporters of the political opposition in Zimbabwe are reported to have been killed by followers of President Mugabe. The news came as hundreds of people attended a memorial service for David Stevens, the first white farmer to be killed by so-called war veterans 10 days ago. The priest urged Mr. Stevens' children to continue their father's dream of a better Zimbabwe. The senior legal officer in Scotland, the Lord Advocate, is asking for the start of the trial of the 2 Libyans accused of the Lockerbie bombing to be postponed. It was due to start at a special court in the Netherlands next week. The prosecution wants more time to consider new evidence presented by the defence. ITV has been given 3 weeks to come up with proposals for increasing audiences for its news programmes. Its regulator, the Independent Television Commission, says viewers for the network's 2 main evening programmes have fallen by almost 14% since News at 10 was scrapped. Our media correspondent Nick Hyam reports.
From Monday, the news gets better.
ITV's New Look news programmes launched just over a year ago.
The ITV Evening News, the top stories from the top team.
At 11. But the new shows are watched by fewer people than the old. Scrapping News at 10 after 30 years improved ITV's ratings, but led to protests from politicians and accusations of dumbing down.
The question over what caused the E. coli...
What's more, ratings for ITV regional news programmes like this fell too, by 22% initially. The watchdog says it's not good enough.
If audiences are falling at a dramatic rate, it's a concern to us. People are being disenfranchised, you know, from regional or from national and international news. And if those kind of losses were being sustained in your core entertainment or soap operas, you wouldn't really tolerate it, would you?
At ITV headquarters, they reckon the regulators bowed to political pressure, but they still have to come up with suggestions for boosting audiences for news.
ITV's been told to come up with a quick fix, but it won't be easy to increase ratings for news programmes in a hurry. We're not likely to see News at 10 come back, but they might split the difference and move the nightly news forward from 11 to 10:30. Nick Hyam, BBC News at ITV headquarters.
Scotland's First Minister Donald Dewar has been admitted to hospital in Glasgow for tests. Mr Dewar, who's 62, is understood to be suffering from a minor heart irregularity. His spokesman said the hospital visit had been pre-arranged. As campaigning continues for next week's local elections in some areas, the voting has already started. It's all part of a series of experiments to try to get more people to use their vote. Our political correspondent Carol Walker reports from the Midlands.
With more than a week to go before the official polling day, people in Redditch were already voting for their local councillors at a polling station in the council offices today. It was as busy as many polling stations will be next Thursday.
I'd miss out on voting because I'm on holiday next week, or I'd have to vote by proxy, so it's worked out very convenient for me.
Well, I work in Redditch Town Centre, and I've actually had to come into the town hall for something to do with work, so I just thought, oh, while I'm here, I'll do it.
This is one of a number of experiments set up by the government to try to counter voter apathy. At the last local elections in some places, fewer than 1 in 10 electors went out to vote. All the political parties are keen to boost turnout, but Labour in particular knows the importance of encouraging its most traditional supporters to go to the polls. Research shows new ways of voting should increase turnout.
The British public say it would make them more likely, rather than less likely, on balance, to vote if polling stations were open for 24 hours, if you could vote on the internet, if you could vote in supermarkets or shopping centres or at train stations.
In Stratford-upon-Avon, voters will have the opportunity to make their choice electronically for the first time next week. Voting at a touch of a button will speed up the whole process.
There will be people that will miss the traditional ballot box and ballot paper, but this is the way forward is extremely quick. We won't have any more bleary-eyed counters at 6:30 in the morning. The most time-consuming element of this is actually getting the data cartridges back here to the council.
They're fed into a central computer and the results are counted within minutes. If the system was introduced nationwide, those long election nights could become a thing of the past. Carol Walker, BBC News in the Midlands.
Now, it was the first day back to work for most people since Big Number Day on Saturday, when 11 million phone numbers and codes in 6 different areas were changed overnight. Critics said it was bound to be a disaster, but it seems most businesses and consumers were getting it right.
Your telephone codes? Do you know your change of number?
With the return to work after the Easter break, today was the first real test to see if the message about the big number changeover got through. It had been feared there'd be a telecommunications meltdown. Affected are London, Cardiff, Portsmouth, Southampton, Coventry, and especially Northern Ireland, where they're subjected to 38 number changes.
I know the changes and I know the area codes. I've been grappling with it for 2 or 3 months.
It will take a bit of time. You just have to think before you dial your own number and that, you know. But as I say, it's like everything. You'll get used to it.
I know my local ones, but I probably wouldn't know any further away than that.
But some businesses have experienced problems, those that failed to update their switchboards to take account of the weekend's changes. There have also been complaints that the telecoms industry itself hasn't completed the switch. Some phone discs and in some areas directory inquiries and the 1471 recall service are also not always giving the new numbers.
There's been some confusion, but not the widespread chaos that some had predicted. But with a 2-year publicity campaign costing some £20 million,
the telecoms industry is breathing a sigh of relief.
In fact, the fears of sort of widespread problems simply haven't materialised. It looks like people throughout the country in each of the code change areas understand the changes and have come to terms with them.
The next big hurdle involves mobile phones. Their numbers change in a year's time. Nicola Carslaw, BBC News.
Now let's catch up with the weather and Helen Willits. And Helen, you've got a deceptively nasty picture of spring there, and I know it's not going to be spring-like.
You're right, Sean, indeed. Well, of course, it's England and Wales where we've had the wettest weather for the last couple of weeks. But I think for the next 36 hours, it'll be Scotland and Northern Ireland where we'll see the wettest, most persistent of the rain. There will be a wet spell in eastern England tonight before rain returns across England and Wales during Thursday. Of course, there will be some showers in between. But let's concentrate on where the Met Office have issued a severe weather warning, stretching right the way out into tomorrow night. Eastern and northeast Scotland, the persistence of the rain bringing some local flooding and some dangerous driving conditions. So that rain stretches right the way up into eastern Scotland, right the way down to Northern Ireland. We've also got some rain now starting to come into the south coast here. So I think it will be quite a wet spell for parts of eastern England tonight, although that should clear away through tomorrow morning. In between, there will be some dry weather, and here we'll see some mist and some local fog. So perhaps a grey start in places tomorrow morning, but that'll clear, and then the best of the sunshine, I think, before those showers develop widely, some slow-moving showers, some hail, some thunder, and still quite wet and cold in that strong northeast wind in the north. More weather in the next half hour.
Dear, oh dear. Thank you very much, Helen. Tonight's main news again, the Tony Martin murder trial. A court has ruled out an inquiry into jury tampering, but his lawyers say they'll continue to investigate allegations of intimidation. The rival bid for Rover, BMW, is urged to extend the deadline for offers. And Manchester United's record signing of Ruud van Nistelrooy is in doubt. The Dutch striker has yet to pass the medical. Now it's nearly 6:30. Don't forget there will be an update on the day's main stories later in the hour, so do stay with us. In a moment, it's time to join the BBC's news teams across the United Kingdom.